You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky. Lots to cover on today's show. We're going to open up the mailbag again at Kamenetzky or at Cam Brothers on Twitter, Kamenetzky Brothers at gmail.com on email. Like, people still send emails, Andy. That's something that people still do. We'll do some rapid fire news. Hopefully at the end. Want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra at only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Stay tuned for the Ultra Player of the Week coming up later in the episode. But first, Andy, the finals. Game 1 is tonight, and it's the Phoenix Suns, and it's the Milwaukee Bucks, and it is questionable as to how many people care.
Yeah, on Cam Brothers, our Twitter account, I put out a poll asking, as Laker fans, do you have a rooting interest in these finals? Pick a choice and explain in the thread. Choice A, yes, rooting for Phoenix. Choice B, rooting for Milwaukee. C, no, just entertain me. D, no, I've checked out. About 2 or so hours into it, around 700 or so votes, the clubhouse leader was no, just entertain me in terms of rooting interest.
Which makes some sense, because there's not, other than, I know, Andy, we've made the joke over the course of the playoffs that, the Suns, rooting for the Suns is essentially like rooting for the Lakers. Former Laker Chris Paul, former Lakers coach Monty Williams, they wear purple. The Lakers wear purple. It's warm there. It's warm here. It's basically the same thing. But it's not.
No, it's not. And the poll makes it clear that it is not, because the next two are basically tied at around 25% rooting for Milwaukee or no, I've checked out. And rooting for Phoenix is holding up the rear at 22%. Largely, it seems, based on the comments left in the thread, due to the presences of one Jay Crowder and one Chris Paul. Laker fans, it appears, are over the both of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, last week,
like either one of
last
them,
week with Chris Paul, I mean, I get why everybody hates Jay Crowder. Like that part, only fans of the team that Jay Crowder plays on would like him.
And look,
they wonder sometimes.
That guy has had a very useful NBA career as a role player. He was on the Heat last season when they went to the playoffs. The teams that he is a part of tend to win a lot, and it's not.
Well, he does things that are very useful.
Right.
I mean, I know it's a cliche. Guys do the dirty work. But he does those things. He brings a tremendous sort of attitude and edge to teams, and he's actually, unlike some of those guys, is actually a functionally good player as well.
He is also, too. I mean, you always hear about these guys who say, I've got friends all over the league. Some of these guys, they're my boys in the offseason. We hang out. But when I step in between those lines, man, I'm not there to make friends. Jay Crowder is specifically stepping in between the lines to make enemies. I feel like that's really his goal is, I want to retire with the entire league hating me.
Yes, and everybody who watches it.
Right.
Like,
if
not
I
just them.
Make all my peers despise me by the time I hang up my sneaks, I'll have known I did a good job.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way he sees it.
And that's how he plays. But I mean, it is worth noting that he's not, he is a guy who actually performs a really useful function playing. Good 3-point shooter, good defender, things like that. I get why people don't like him. The CP3 stuff is, I last week was tying so many NBA people, like diehards, not the casuals, but the diehards in knots, because on the one hand, I think most people who follow the league and really love basketball and love and appreciate like the what it is to be as great as Chris Paul have moved past. Oh, people can hear that. It's July 5th. People are still shooting fireworks off at our house. You have moved past the thing where, he's never been to the Western Conference Finals. Like and everybody gets, like, Chris Paul is one of the transcendent players of this generation. He is one of the greatest point guards of all time. And to finally see him break through that thing that we assign to players who don't get to the finals is really cool, because he is that good. And what he's doing at 36 years old is remarkable. But man, does he make it hard to cheer for him sometimes. I mean,
he does.
Some of those flops last week were just egregious.
Okay, the sequence that I think epitomizes what people really don't like about Chris Paul was when Patrick Beverley undercut him fighting through a screen and really went out of his way to make that contact. And Chris Paul went ass over tea kettle, landed really hard.
Right.
And if anything, I saw more reaction on Twitter towards Chris Paul, angry not because of the play from Patrick Beverley, because at this point that's just Patrick Beverley being Patrick Beverley. It was Chris Paul flopping and putting himself more ass over tea kettle than he necessarily
right. And then he had to. They thought he was
well, you saw afterwards, Chris Paul didn't even seem that mad. Like, he and Patrick Beverley talked afterwards, and it felt like game recognizing game from Chris Paul, because
it might have been.
This is not something, if we're really being honest, and you and I are both huge Chris Paul fans.
Yes.
But this is not something that he would be above doing. If we're all being honest.
Well, look, Andy, when you talk about the egregious one, I'm surprised you went to that one, because at least Patrick Beverley made contact with him. The far more egregious play was the one where DeMarcus Cousins walked by him, whatever, and he went down like a sniper hit him. That one was terrible.
I can't think of a superstar in my time watching the NBA really closely, which has been about 30 or so years, that has ever ended up with as dirty a reputation as Chris Paul. Like, you don't think superstars typically don't end up in that position because they don't have to be. Like, there's been a few times where I can remember Dwayne Wade crossing a line, or Kobe crossed a line a few times, but Kobe was not by any reasonable measure a dirty player. He was really physical, but Kobe was nowhere close to being.
Chris Paul has that rep as somebody who will do everything right. Kobe would go up to the line, and all players occasionally cross it, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. You play 20 years like Kobe did.
Yeah.
You're gonna have moments, but like Chris, most people, they describe it as they play right up to that line and then they stop. Chris Paul goes right up to the line and then
dances on it
a half a step over, and then maybe put your right foot in, put your right foot out. But and it's the little stuff too, that it's not even those things on the court. It's like the thing a couple of years ago when I forget what the exact context was, but he pointed out that somebody didn't have their jersey tucked in.
Yeah, it's a rule.
It is. But it's like, come on, Narc. Seriously. But the other thing that I would love to see CP win, because he's too good to be the guy that we talk about.
We're not far removed from his contract being considered maybe the worst in the NBA. Like, the turnaround that he's had 16 seasons in, age 36, in terms of just this perception, despite the level of his play really not dropping at all. It's incredible. I can't think of a comp.
No, the rehab of what he did with Oklahoma City last year, and then taking the Suns from out of the playoffs to the finals. I mean, it's remarkable. I will say though, I'm rooting for CP. I'm also really rooting for Drew Holiday. He is one of my favorite, I guess, sort of non-elite players in the league. He's an all-star. He's an excellent player, but nobody considers Drew Holiday elite. But I think he is one of those guys who is just, he is excellent. He's just an excellent player and a great teammate, an outstanding person.
Yes.
And I would love to see him rewarded with a title. And if they win, and especially if Giannis looks likely to miss game one, who knows how good he's going to be. If they win, obviously Middleton's going to have to be great. Lopez is going to have to do some stuff. They're going to have to get, the Bryn Forbeses of the world to contribute. But Drew Holiday is going to have to be awesome on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, the matchup between,
if they win,
the matchup between him and Chris Paul, I think, is going to be really fun to watch. Like, you mentioned Giannis being doubtful for game one, and assuming he's able to get on the court with enough time to make an impact and the Bucks end up winning, it's going to be really ironic, Brian, just in the sense that this whole season, Giannis was written off as an MVP candidate because of the last 2 years in the playoffs. And then this became the year where he couldn't win an MVP and he ends up winning a championship. It'll just be a reminder of how random and often stupid.
The rules that we have about how we decide, like, I'm just tired of voting for that guy, or like, I won't vote for Giannis for this regular season award because he doesn't perform well enough in the playoffs. And I get the people who say it should be a playoff award and playoffs should count. I get it.
It's not.
But it's not. It is not a playoff award. They have other awards for the playoffs. And this ain't it.
And the only thing before we go that is going to be even dumber than the irony of what we were just talking about there is the takes. If the Bucks somehow win the finals without Giannis either being a factor or being able to play, oh my God, the stupid is going to be out of control. It is going to be off the charts stupid.
Yeah, I'm not here for that.
No,
I'm not here for that. I am not here for that. All right, let's next. Let's open up the mailbag. Got a really interesting question at Kamenetzky Brothers at gmail.com about how the Lakers should be playing AD. The answer to which would have a massive influence on how they spend their money this offseason. We'll do that next.
It's time for this week's Michelob Ultra Player of the Week. There has not been any action this week, but as we mentioned, the finals are starting today, Suns, Bucks, and the biggest reason that Milwaukee managed, Brian, to get through games 5 through 7.
I just realized that if you're really not into that series, you could just call it sucks.
Jesus, that not cool. Not cool during
it
this
isn't.
moment,
I know.
Brian.
I'm just saying, but that's when the thought came into my head.
Right.
I'm sorry, Michelob.
Brian, joy.
That didn't bring
passion,
joy.
All of that. Like,
no, that's not
shut
joy.
Up. Seriously,
it brought me joy.
I mean, like, self-control, recognize the moment. Like
you laughed. You got a little joy out of it.
Whatever. Anyway, I'm trying to dap up Chris Middleton because he was a huge reason that they got through this. In games 6 and 7, he averaged 29 points on 20 of 42 shooting from the field, 6 of 16 from behind the arc, 12 of 13 from the line, averaged 7.5 assists, massive performances from a guy that is not a true superstar, but he's an all-star. And his team has needed him to be one. He came through. If the Bucks can survive a game or two without Giannis, maybe split the opening pair, they're going to need Middleton to come through like that again. It's also an incredible story, Brian. He's a second-round draft pick who's gone on to average 17 on his career, make 2 All-Star games, well over $100 million in his career before it's all said and done. That's not a sucks story, Brian.
Nope.
Michelob Ultra, it's only 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. Remember, it's only worth it if you enjoy it. Joy creates success. Enjoyment isn't the end game. It's the only game, dummy.
Speaking of sucks, I will say, but we'll get to the mailbag here in a second. The question that the answer to the poll that we posted before, where 25% of the people are like, I've already checked out. Some of that is just the Lakers aren't in it. I don't care. Some of that is just, I'm ready for this season to be over. I gotta be honest with you. So am I. Like, I want to see a great finals. I want guys to do well, like players on both teams. I hope everybody goes out and just plays really well. It's a great games and all that. I am so ready for this season to be over.
Brian, if that is your mindset, then if I can make a little recommendation, it's the reminder that today on the road to the finals, our NBA playoffs coverage is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. And at 2.6 carbs, 95 calories, we can all enjoy the games a little more this season. If you're not all that excited inherently about this matchup, I bet crack open a couple of Michelob Ultras, you're going to be feeling differently.
Yeah, probably true. All right, so let's get to the mailbag here. This question, best ways to get a hold of us. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That's a great way. We really like that one with a question, and we'll answer that for sure. At Kamenetzky Brothers, Kamenetzky Brothers at gmail.com, which is how this one got to us, and then at Cam Brothers on Twitter. This one in the email mailbag comes from Jim Joes. What's up, fella? He says, should the Lakers do what the Raptors did in 2019 this upcoming season, where they started Marc against big fives and they started small with Siakam at the 5 instead of just playing it, so basically what he's asking, Andy, is don't have a set starting lineup. You have a matchup-based starting lineup, and if you're playing a smaller team that goes smaller, you just start AD at the 5 and proceed. And if you have a Nikola Jokic or one of these other big bodies or something like that, DeAndre Ayton or Joel Vucevic, whatever it might be, then you start Marc Gasol, presumably. whoever else, whatever other big body you have. It's a really interesting question because the answer to it, the Lakers have a relatively limited pool of resources that they can use to fill out the rest of the roster, including, by the way, how you bring back Andre Drummond, perhaps. And the way that they answer this question goes a long way towards figuring out how you allot those resources, where you spend your money, who you give your big exception to, and stuff like that. So your thoughts, Andy Kamenetzky?
I do think that they need to consider more flexibility in the way they use Anthony Davis, specifically at the 5. Not just because it's the most effective, it's the most effective version in the minds of a lot of people, and I think, accurately for Anthony Davis, like it's his best position. I also think it makes things a lot simpler in terms of coming up with the most ideal lineups, because you're not having to create these alternate looks that really are first and foremost about not having to play Anthony Davis at the 5. Unless you can find a true stretch big with size, you're putting one less shooter out on the floor that creates those type of lanes and space for both LeBron and AD. I think it makes it more complicated than need be. And remember, last week we had Jeff Stotts, the great injury expert, on, and I asked him about my theory that for all the talk about not wanting to play Anthony Davis at the 5 the majority of his minutes because that type of physicality leaves him more prone to injury, I feel like playing more along the perimeter, especially with some of the defensive assignments, leaves him more prone to injury because he has to cover so much ground so quickly.
It's certainly it's a different kind. If nothing else, it's a different kind of injury.
And Jeff Stotts thought actually that makes a lot of sense, and he doesn't buy into that conventional wisdom, lock, stock, barrels, and all that. To smoking barrels, whatever.
But I think the difference is it's not that there aren't physical demands to him playing, the 4 and running around against like traditional 4s. Although if you're, playing Nikola Jokic, it's a whole different kind of deal. But compared to quote unquote, sort of the traditional center, Andre Drummond, that type of guy, it's a different kind of physical wear. Like he clearly doesn't want to be bodying up Joel Embiid on the block. And like I get, and I know what you're saying before. Like you can make accommodations for that. With Jim Joe's question, I just feel like the last couple of years, not that the Lakers haven't been successful, because they clearly had that. Before the injuries, I'm old enough to remember when they won a title, Andy.
Right? Yeah, and things were going well this year.
Yes,
before all the injuries set in, and that's ultimately the reason that they got knocked out in the first round. But I still think that this constantly configuring lineups so AD doesn't have to play center, other than maybe 15 to 20% of games, I do think makes things more complicated than need be in ways that can make it harder for the team on the floor. Even if they are succeeding, it's harder.
Here's where I would push back on that. Two things. First of all, I don't know how much we never really got a chance to see how much 5 he would play this year, like what they would have done. I also think just because he was hurt too much. And so, that kind of took that out. Obviously, like you said, they won doing it that way. And I do think, though, there is the possibility of a diminishing return. If you were only sort of going with that small lineup with AD at the 5, or that is your primary lineup, I think there is a strong potential for a diminishing return, even that goes beyond, AD is going to get hurt. I kind of agree with you. I think if he can get past the sort of mental part of not just disliking it, I think you're probably right. I don't think there's much more of an injury risk doing one versus the other. Especially for him. I mean, he's just an injury risk doing anything. And I think the formula is pretty good. I mean, if guys stay healthy and you have the right kind of centers around him, I mean, like, think about, we were talking about the finals before. I mean, like, Brook Lopez would be phenomenal as a guy that you could stick next to Anthony Davis. We're talking about somebody who wouldn't be in the way offensively, could still help out defensively and do all that stuff. Like, I think it's a matter, if possible, of just finding some better fits. They got by with two guys who don't stretch the floor in that first season. They tried to stretch the floor in the second season with Gasol, and presumably will do that again next year. But maybe there's a way that they can just do a little better. And then some of it's just Anthony Davis, like we've talked about. He can eliminate a lot of the talking point by just playing more aggressively, regardless of who's on the floor. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Is this is more of an AD thing to me than it is a lineup thing, because you can find centers that work. I mean, Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee on paper shouldn't be like a combination where AD would thrive. And it wasn't perfect, but it worked. It was good enough. And, and I think it takes some of the argument. So my biggest problem with the argument is I think it too often takes the focus away from the person most responsible for how AD plays with a center next to him, which is Davis.
I don't disagree. I think, though, in terms, like I said, the overall effect on the team beyond just Davis individually, but like you said, it affects the way they would use the money.
If to your point, if they're going to use that large exception on a center, it needs to be a center that fits comfortably with Davis, so that you're not setting yourself up for another Drummond situation.
Well, speaking of which, Andre Drummond was recently doing a Q&A with Lakers Central and was asked about his future and re-signing. And he said, I had an incredible time in my career to have this opportunity to play with LeBron James instead of against him. Hopefully things go the right way and we'll try to run it back again. He has mentioned many times, including his exit interview, a desire to run it back. The finances, though, are going to be challenging with Drummond. He has already said publicly that anybody who thinks he's taken the minimum is drunk. Those were his exact words, you drunk, to somebody who suggested that on Twitter. So you start getting to the taxpayer mid-level exception.
Right, that's really one of the only ways the Lakers, this is by the way we talked about with Schroeder, one of the reasons it's important to bring him back is otherwise you got to probably replace him with that exception. That's what I'm getting at. Like, I would bring back Andre Drummond in a heartbeat for the minimum. I understand all the problems people have with him. He's way better than most players you're going to find at that price point. And when you're making the minimum, you're kind of disposable. And if it doesn't work out or people are upset, you can move off of people without a whole lot of consequence. I would not. And I say this as somebody who liked Drummond and thought he played better than he got credit for. I would not use that large exception on him unless it would not. I'll put it this way. It wouldn't be my first choice.
No, it wouldn't be for me either. It feels like you are addressing more of an area of non-need at the expense of stuff that clearly over the last couple of years have shown need to be shorn up.
All right. Let's do some quick newsy bits when we next, because there was some fun and interesting stuff that happened over the weekend or close to it that we haven't had a chance to talk about on the pod, and we'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season's in full swing. You can track on all the action at BetOnline. This week, as always, tons of sports action on the go. Get all the latest news, odds, info for your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, UFC, MMA. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop, your mobile device. Check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore. This is your chance to get into the game as teams are neck deep in the playoffs. The finals, Brian, the NBA finals are upon us. So head to the website, use your mobile device, sign up today, receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit using the promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Locked On Lakers also brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models and all that stuff, it's impossible for your local auto chain to parts store, all that, to stock everything you need. So why endure all the questions and the do you have an EX and LX and OX? I mean, I don't even know if that's a thing. And then you're being
visiting
sold,
your mother. There's just questions.
And you're being sold stuff. You don't know if the guy behind the counter is trying to get rid of stock, if he's selling you the right thing. You have only you have everything you need to get the right choices. You go to your computer, you go to your phone, you go to rockauto.com, and that's all the access you need. So why spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a dealership? I'll give you one. Rock Auto, $216 for a fuel pump for a Honda Odyssey. I drive one of those, Andy, a Honda Odyssey. You know how much that would cost me at a chain store? $353. That's stupid. I'm not doing that. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low. So go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked in on their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, let's do some news, Andy, and we'll start here. The Lakers had an Antetokounmpo. We had not a very good one.
The general consensus is that the Lakers had the worst of the three by a pretty wide margin.
Our Giannis was the worst Giannis.
Yeah,
of all the Giannis's in the league.
It was by a distance that was basically Giannis's wingspan.
Yeah, pretty much.
How much worse he was than the middle one, who's
and God bless him. I mean, he seems like a nice kid, and he's pretty good. He's way better at basketball than I am. Kostas appears to be done as a Laker, reportedly signing potentially with Olympiacos or maybe even another team overseas. I was a little confused by the reporting, but looks pretty much like he's done with the Lakers and probably out of the NBA next year. Not really a huge surprise, Andy. As I always say, I really respect the restraint the Lakers showed by not cutting Kostas the instant Giannis signed his extension.
Yeah.
So
they're a classy organization.
Yeah, they are. And I will say, 17th guy on the roster, fine. Depth is really important, and I don't want to have too many dead spots on the rosters filled with guys that literally cannot play.
Yeah, I mean, he's a two-way guy.
Too much of a development thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's a two-way guy, so there was only so much any guy in his particular position was going to be playing anyway.
Sure.
But at this point, with the, frankly, the need to tamper now off the table because Giannis is locked up, I guess it's never too early for Olympiacos to start looking for tampering, and that's why you bring in Kostas for them. But the Lakers just need to start looking forward to somebody else that they can target for tampering and potential free agents that they might want to bring in. I'm thinking,
17th spot on the roster should be considered the tampering spot.
Well, I'm thinking
reserved for best friends, brothers, sisters, cousins, things like that.
I can't think of any siblings right now that would put them in that type of positioning. But given what's going on with Portland and Damian Lillard and the rumors that he could be unhappy, I think they should be looking towards the summer. Like the conventional wisdom used to be that the Lakers would bring in Melo to make LeBron happy. I think you bring him in for the potential of Damian Lillard, like that connection, or you sign Enes Kanter. Enes Kanter had 2 seasons with Damian Lillard, and they seem to get along great. Like those two seem tight. So does Enes Kanter fit what they're looking for? Not really. Would I bring him in? Absolutely.
Sure. All right. So next item comes from Marc Stein, the great Marc Stein at the New York Times, who's leaving the Times, I believe, and going solo on Substack. He's going to launch his own deal on Substack. So I would encourage people to sign up for that. The Lakers, this from Stein, the Lakers have interviewed former Wizards coach Scott Brooks for a potential spot on Frank Vogel's staff, league sources say. ESPN reported last week that former Knicks and Grizzlies coach David Fizdale would soon join the Lakers after Jason Kidd's departure to Dallas. So what's interesting to this isn't so much that Scott Brooks, although obviously that is a very big and well-known name. 2 things. First of all, it at least implies that the Lakers think that another member of the coaching staff might be going. I mean, there's that. I wonder who it would be. I wonder, and then obviously, how they would replace him. Scott Brooks would be a pretty big name to step into that after adding Fizdale too. It's a lot of former coaches. Yeah.
I mean, for a guy like Frank Vogel, who we feel like has job security, and he doesn't seem like he's somebody who's on the hot seat, despite going out in the first round. If anything, he's been talked about having an extension. When you add David Fizdale and Scott Brooks, those are 2 guys who start giving the appearance of potential coach in waiting on a
maybe.
staff.
Although
I'm not saying
those guys,
happening.
Their last, Brooks's, I think, tenure in Washington, while there are a lot of caveats, I think will be seen kind of as a disappointment, and certainly Fizdale's
No.
two runs as a head coach would be as well.
I'm not saying it is happening. I'm just saying they carry status above the typical assistants. Like they're much closer to where Nate McMillan was, who ended up taking over for Lloyd Pierce and eventually now getting a long-term deal. Those guys are much closer to the McMillan status.
It appears that Frank Vogel is much closer to Nate McMillan than to Lloyd Pierce.
But you know what I'm saying? Like as opposed to say like Phil Handy, who has never really been rumored as a head coach heavily. You know, that's all I'm saying.
Right. So we'll see what happens there. It's just intriguing to see a big name interviewing for a coaching spot on Frank Vogel's staff when presumably there isn't a coaching spot available. So we'll see how that goes. Before we go, interesting story this weekend. LeBron James Jr. playing in a high school showcase game at St. Vincent St. Mary's in a gym literally named for his dad. So as the story was reported, a PA announcer took a shot at Bronny, saying that he was getting calls because his dad was in the building. The gym bears his name. That really pissed off LeBron, who confronted the PA announcer during the game. Yeah. And has, like everything LeBron does at one of Bronny's games, gotten a ton of attention. For me, it's just a reminder of, first of all, I think you would agree that maybe, I don't know what normal behavior at a high school showcase is from the PA guy, but that seemed out of line.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I feel like, LeBron's always going to be in a position of getting scrutinized for his presence at this sort of thing because everything LeBron does is a big deal. That's just the world that we live in. But also, too, when you are an athlete of his stature with a kid who is developing his own pretty high-profile sports career in its own right, you're going to be under that type of microscope. And it's one thing for LeBron to throw his weight around during a game because he can, or start micromanaging Bronny's coaches or teammates, again, because he can. Like, that's out of bounds. But it's another thing for him to stand up for his son after his son is being used as really the butt of a public joke. And I don't blame LeBron for calling bullshit there. Like it's a tightrope, I'm sure, for him as a basketball dad. But I have no issue with him saying, all right, this moment, I'm not just going to sit back and watch you essentially publicly humiliate my son.
I think, you can argue about, do you confront him? Does it make it worse? All that stuff. But at the very least, I think anybody.
I think if you don't confront it there, though, there's the chance that it keeps going.
Maybe, I don't know. But I think what I was going to say is just that I think anybody could understand the impulse as a father to find that kind of thing to be out of bounds. And just there's no perfect way for him to do it because, the only way that you can avoid the potential distraction thing, people you're showing up to LeBron for your own attention, to Bronny's games, or whatever, is to not go to your kids' games. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that is a fair thing to ask of LeBron or of Bronny or anyone. And then he'd be accused of not caring. So there's no perfect way to do it. But that guy seemed to be wildly out of line. And if that's something normal at a high school showcase game, it really shouldn't be. Reminder, we'll be back at noon this week, right, Andy, for Spotify Green Room. Please continue to sign up for Locked On Lakers on YouTube. We've got a great response over the course of this week. The more people that subscribe, the more stuff we can do. We really appreciate everybody getting on board. Tell your friends, create for every Gmail account you have. Just go ahead and sign up for Locked On Lakers on YouTube. We really appreciate it. We'll see everybody tomorrow.